All right, week 6 of college football is in the books. More importantly, week 3 of Big Ten conference play. And this is the craziest week where now I have to figure some things out because of a couple crazy games. But it wouldn't be as fun if there weren't any. So stay tuned to see where these teams belong now that we have some more data points to go off of. These are power rankings, not resume rankings. And if you like the video, please like, share, and subscribe. I'm very new to YouTube, and this would help me greatly in getting my channel off the ground and encourage me to make more videos. I will not only be ranking college football, but a plethora of genres in the future. All right, kicking off our list at the bottom, I have the Northwestern Wildcats. I really kind of have them at the bottom, not because they're a garbage or terrible, but just by default because of what went down this weekend and looking at the other teams. I really do not believe there is a bad team in the Big Ten this year. Like there usually is. There's no automatic win. A team that you can just kind of circle and look past and just count that as a win already. You can't really take any team for granted, and you can especially see that with UCLA. And you really can't take Northwestern, I don't think, either, for granted. They did put up some level of resistance against Oregon and looked respectful in that game. I do not know what to think of their win versus UCLA last week. I think UCLA was probably still getting their legs under them with the new interim coach. And Rick Neuheisel's son wasn't the offensive coordinator yet last week. But Northwestern just doesn't really have any talent or anything you can look at as an advantage that they have over other teams. The run blocking might be one thing. They had some success with that against Oregon, but for now, not being a team with much talent and not having much data to go off of for this team, I have them at the bottom really by default. Next up, I have the Wisconsin Badgers at number 17. They played the Michigan Wolverines this week and fell to them 24-10. If you look at the box score, you would think that this game would be about 34-10. But Wisconsin, to their credit, kept it close and stalled some of Michigan's drives because their D-line was stout on third and short yardage situations. This is really the strength of their team. Really, their entire team is their defensive line. And really, if you watch the game or this team during the season, they are not good in the secondary, nor are they good anywhere on offense in hardly any capacity, really. And once Michigan abandoned trying to primarily run at Wisconsin, the strength of their team, and they began to air it out in the second half, it really exposed their secondary. Looking to the offense, Wisconsin had a well-scripted opening drive where they schemed well against what they probably thought would be Michigan's tendency and how their defensive line alignment would be, and had a few gash runs against them on the first drive. But once Michigan adapted, Wisconsin could really not do anything to get anything going. They had to mostly resort to getting quick release short pass plays to avoid the Michigan pass rush. And they could not get much going in the run game. This is not a terrible team. They're not like a MAC team or anything. I do not think they will get completely blown out by each team they play. Their defensive line can keep them in games to a certain length, I think. But they have nothing going on offense to really capitalize on anything or keep their defense from getting worn down as the game goes on. All right, going to number 16, I have the Purdue Boilermakers. Now, this is another example of a very low-tier Big Ten team that is not a pushover and can make games against any opponent interesting. You look at USC, Notre Dame, and most recently Illinois this week from the past 3 weeks. They were able to put up a significant amount of points in these games, enough to make opposing teams a bit nervous. The strength of this team is certainly the offense. Their quarterback is very competent, as is their passing game. And they certainly gash opponents at times with their passing attack. And as a result, things tend to open up their running game there at times for players like Maccabee, although I heard a different running back's name called in an Illinois game. But going to the other side of the ball, their defense, however, is a liability and have been getting destroyed in the last 3 games by really good teams, really good offenses. This team under the former UNLV coach, who took that team from a perennial nothing to 1 win away from the playoffs in only a couple of years, is taking this team in the right direction. They need bodies, really, because this coach had to scramble in the transfer portal and had to fill 50 player slots this year. I think it will be a matter of time given who this coach is and his track record before this team begins to become a real, true competitor in the Big Ten. Once they get some better transfers and can get some better recruiting, I think things will begin to take off for this team. Going further along on our list, I have the Michigan State Spartans at 15. Similarly to their game with USC, they lost in a high-scoring game to Nebraska. And their junk touchdown late in the game made this a bit closer than it seemed. This is really another team that has enough explosiveness on offense to keep games interesting. Aiden Childs is the kind of quarterback thing that can make you nervous if you're an imposing fan or coach, because he has explosive playmaking ability with his feet running and scrambling and finding receivers, especially like Nick Marsh down the field. But his problem each of these 5 games to this point has been his inconsistencies. And really this team's only strength is their passing attack with Aiden Childs' somewhat dynamic play. Other than that, teams' offenses have been pouring it on their defense, while opposing defenses have been creating havoc in their backfield, leading to much of the consistency issues really on offense. So yeah, this team is a team that can threaten teams, but they will likely keep coming up short most of their remaining games. At number 14, I have the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. They had a bye this week after coming up short last week to Minnesota. And it was in a game that they looked like they were in much control of in the first half. But it seemed Minnesota made adjustments and kind of imposed their will a bit. Rutgers offensively is led by Kaliak McManus, who has really come along from where he was 2 years ago. I thought when he was at Minnesota about 2 years ago, I thought he was pretty terrible. But it just goes to show how great the Big Ten quarterbacks are this year. And it's hard to rank them. And McManus was impressive in their last game. Really impressive. I think this is really the first game where I really got to see a lot of him. And he made a lot of difficult tight window throws with a lot of composure. But you kind of had the feeling in this game that it was not sustainable, as it seemed a lot of good offensive plays by Rutgers were difficult. It's like everything they earned was really difficult. I really do not know yet if Rutgers is a middle-class team of the Big Ten or not. I would have had them that way before last week, but how things have sort of shaped up in Big Ten play with everyone, including Minnesota getting blown out, which is a team they lost to, I have them drop down to number 14. All right, at number 13, I have the Minnesota Golden Gophers. I dropped them this week because they got thoroughly dominated by Ohio State this week. And that's probably putting it lightly. They got blown out 42-3. And going into this week, I thought of Minnesota as a kind of the middle of the middle class, middle of the middle tier Big Ten. And it's a team you could rank probably somewhere between 9 and 11. But they seemed like the mean standard of the Big Ten, really. But they do still have a good running back room now that Darius Taylor is back from his injury. The teams they played earlier in the season really loaded up, I think, in stopping the rushing attack. That they were able to have a balanced offense by exploiting teams that loaded the box by being more aggressive than they usually have been the past several seasons under PJ Fleck. And it looks like PJ Fleck is trying to really progress the offense this year by trusting his quarterback a lot more than the past several seasons. Really hasn't been since 2019 that they had a formidable passing attack. But I think it showed this week if a team can handle their rushing game without committing more players, like Ohio State can, they just are really not good enough in the passing game to do anything. And I know Ohio State is the lead in the secondary, but kind of compared to Washington, for example, who I consider kind of an upper middle tier team, who kind of like near the same class as Minnesota, did a bit more against Ohio State last week offensively, running and throwing. And Washington, more importantly, was able to hold Ohio State to much lesser points. So, kind of looking at them and more data points and more due to more games being played, it appears that Minnesota is not as good as I thought they might have been at this moment. They did not put up much of any kind of a fight against Ohio State, but they did beat Rutgers last week, so 13 seems about right. All right, now we get to a fun one. I was watching the Michigan State-Nebraska game at the time when the crew for the game gave an update on the UCLA-Penn State game and showed UCLA scoring going up 17-7. So naturally, I immediately switched to this game and watched the whole game, setting it back from the beginning and getting caught up, then finishing the whole game. As it unfolded more and more, I could see that what was going on was not really a fluke. UCLA was playing a great game, and Penn State, although played bad, was not just throwing pick sixes, having special teams disasters, other than that brilliant onside kick early in the game by UCLA. And they just weren't not just giving the game away. UCLA earned it completely, and Nico, the transfer from Tennessee, was just on and playing like he actually deserved the NL money he thought he could get from Tennessee. And they were running the ball with success also, and winning the line of scrimmage on that side of the ball. It looked like to me. It was insane. And there's plenty to say about Penn State, which you will hear me talk about sooner than later. I'll foreshadow it that way because it's obvious they dropped quite a bit in the rankings. But got to be impressed by Rick Neuheisel's son who called the game. And wow, what just changing the coaching staff could do for a team. This looks like a completely different team, and this makes things really hard for me, of course. In fact, when I was watching this game unfold, I was thinking about what am I going to do with this for my next video. I don't know what to do with them, or what to think other than I think this was not a complete fluke. It's crazy to think that all of us were wondering if they would even win a single game this year. Because, boy, at one point it looked like it was more than likely that they weren't winning a single game. Now, after beating a heavyweight opponent, and this has to be one of the biggest upsets of all time in college football. Who knows how many more wins that they could have. We will just have to watch and find out because now I am intrigued with this team. At number 11, I have the Maryland Terrapins. I was pretty close to putting this team in the second video where I ranked teams 9 through 1. And this was when they were up 20-0 in the third quarter and 20-3 in the fourth quarter before a total collapse. And this has to feel a bit like deja vu under the Loxley era. For example, team starts off really good on the season in non-conference play, and in the first game or two in the Big Ten schedule, they win those games, go like 4 or 5-0, and then they have a good offense with really good to great quarterback play with a good wide receiver room. Then it has some pivotal game in the Big Ten that they end up losing, and momentum of season is then killed, and then they drop a bunch of games in the Big Ten, and they either miss a bowl game or just barely make bowl eligibility. Well, we will see this year if they are resilient enough to overcome this letdown. And I happen to think they probably will, looking at their schedule. Normally, I would say let's see how well they hold up in the trenches against more traditional style Big Ten foes. But the good news is most of the rest of their Big Ten opponents do not really have a noticeable advantage along the line of scrimmage. They play Michigan State, Nebraska, UCLA, and Illinois, for example. And those are winnable games against opponents that are really not known for their trench play, in my opinion. I'm curious about UCLA, though. They ran the ball pretty well against Penn State, but that team's a total mystery right now. Only Michigan, really, and Indiana are teams that will likely test their offensive and defensive lines, really, for Maryland. So Maryland still has a lot of season to play, with potential to get more wins this year under Loxley than they have any other season. Finishing up our first teams 18 through 10 of my power rankings, I have Nebraska at number 10. And being at 10 is not a reflection of Nebraska being mediocre. I think if they were in the Big 12, they would be one of the best teams. And if they were in the ACC, they would probably be one of the 3 or 4 best teams. But I just think the Big 10 is particularly strong this year, and them being at 10 is just a reflection of that. And now looking at Nebraska this week, I think they had a nice rebound win against Michigan State after losing to Michigan, and Michigan is a game that they really wanted desperately as a program-defining win. But with their win this week, I think they have regained some positive momentum that they really needed. Now, these next 3 games against Maryland, Minnesota, and Northwestern are, I think, must-wins, because their schedule gets a bit harder after that in their last 4 games. They need to also separate themselves, I think, from the pack, as I think Maryland and Minnesota are kind of their peers, just kind of like those middle-class Big Ten teams. And looking at their last 4 games, they face Penn State on the road. Again, we'll see how Penn State rebounds. They face UCLA, total mystery. And they also face Iowa at the end of the season. So, and they have another hard game. They also have to travel to USC. So, so I think they definitely need to win these next 3 for their final stretch. And I think if you're a Nebraska fan, it would be nice to finally beat Iowa. I think they play at Kinnick Stadium. That would be quite a program-defining win and a good way to end the season, because they've had a lot of close games with Iowa. Iowa has, of course, close games with just about everybody, and they just haven't been able to get over the hump especially when they play them at Kinnick Stadium. So I think, but I think that things set up in their schedule for them to win probably at least 8 games. I think if you're a Nebraska fan, you should be disappointed if they get less than 8. And I think they have potential. I mean, I don't know what their ceiling is based on their schedule, because some of these teams are mysteries, but they could. I mean, like maybe 10 could be their ceiling. You know, who knows? I think 8 is pretty realistic expectations, though. 8 or 9 wins for Nebraska, based on what you expect from Matt Rule in his third year, and based on what I think Nebraska fans should expect.